Spider-Man for many of us is the ultimate hero. His endurance in society cannot go unnoticed, being someone everyone can relate to in your friendly neighborhood. What Stan Lee did was something brilliant, creating someone who was flawed and young enough to connect to so many who had read in the genre and already had persevered enough despite his attitude, where it relates in the simplicity of those like Peter Parker. And he was right to do something like that when you look back on how successful he has become, with one of the world's most popular heroes of all time, and a new film in Brand New Day expected to achieve higher records in the enduring story of this version of the man himself. And of course, because of that, we have to talk about Tom Holland's Spider-Man in great detail in what was his biggest film of its kind, equivalent to a mini Endgame in No Way Home. And looking back on No Way Home is looking at a film that has gone through its ups and downs in reception when it was released and far after its release, which is what made me want to create this video today, since I've seen so many videos saying that No Way Home might not have aged well enough, or others saying it's not as good as it was, removing the underlying layers of the Spider-Man team-up with the past versions of himself. But looking back on it now, where Spider-Man as a character is going into a brand new day, I still think it's a great film that shaped what Tom Spider-Man was meant to be, as noted even from the start. Because the heart of this film is still in that journey of Peter. It is still his film to shape who he is to become, with the bonus of our nostalgic past for the original versions coming to help him with the enemies that have faced Spider-Man before. So while the overall image of No Way Home might be a nostalgia-fested film with past villains and heroes coming in, it's a good one with heart that tests the hero or Spider-Man in what they should become. That this movie emphasizes what it truly means to be a Spider-Man and the weight it carries when you have to do the right thing over the life you have. So let's today go back and revisit No Way Home and see why it remains a heartfelt classic in the ever-timeless story of Spider-Man. But before we dive into No Way Home itself, it's worth taking a look at where Tom Holland's Spider-Man actually was going for into it. This version of Peter Parker was never meant to be the fully formed, world-weary hero outright from the gate. He was younger, lighter, and still figuring things out, and that was kind of the point. Because when you look back at the time period of where he was introduced, the MCU was in full gear, and just beforehand you did have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies that were separate from Sony. So what you have to do is reintroduce him in a new, quicker light that shows him already gaining the powers but in a different way. The awkward high school student balancing classes, friends, and a secret life, making mistakes and learning the hard way that being a hero isn't all about the suit or the gadgets that Tony gave him. It was always about choosing to do the right thing even when it costed him. Then of course came Infinity War and Endgame, and suddenly this friendly neighborhood kid was thrown into the middle of a universe-ending war where he himself got snapped, came back 5 years later and helped take down Thanos. Where for him, in a short time span, he went from stopping bike thieves to dealing with the Vulture to standing on the front lines of the biggest battles the MCU has ever had, where Far From Home picked right up after that with Peter processing everything while on a school trip to Europe. He was looking for that break, looking for a mentor figure in Quentin Beck, and ended up facing a different kind of threat, the one that played on his insecurities and ultimately exposed his identity to the entire world. That's the version of Spider-Man who walked into No Way Home. Not the polished, experienced hero, not the one who's already carried the full weight of the mantle for years, just the teenager who's been through more than most adults, who's still growing into what it means to be a Spider-Man and how it's about to have the last pieces of his normal life ripped away. And in order to solve that, you need to set the stage for a story that would force him to confront the real cost of a hero that he was becoming. And looking at it now with Brand New Day on the horizon, that younger interpretation doesn't feel like a weakness. It feels like the necessary steps and starting point for the more mature, more isolated Peter that we're about to see next. As we all know, the first part of No Way Home picks off where the last film left us, where he's been exposed to the world. And what hits hardest in these early scenes isn't just the chaos around Peter, it's how quickly it spills over onto the people who actually make up his actual life. Aunt May, MJ, Ned all get pulled into it. They're arrested alongside him by damage control, where even after Matt Murdock clears and steps into Peter's legal trouble, the damage is already done. The controversy sticks, and he's out there known to the world as Spider-Man. When the rejection letters from MIT show up, it's not just about Peter's future that takes the hit, it's MJ's and Ned's too. The film makes it clear that the cost of his double life is no longer something he can keep contained. It's affecting the only family he's ever had left, and the two friends who stood by him through everything. That guilt is what drives him, of course, to the sanctum. Peter goes to Doctor Strange not because he wants the spotlight or power, he wants his life back. He wants his friends to get their lives back. The chance at college and the normal days and the ability to exist without the world treating him like extensions of Spider-Man's mistakes is what he lives for. And of course, at that moment, Strange agrees to cast that spell to make everyone forget Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But of course, as that same character in that moment of desperation, Peter cannot fully let go. He wants the people close to him still, keeping interrupting the spell, asking for exceptions that MJ, Ned, May, Happy still all remember him. And it's in those small human requests are what corrupts everything and makes the spell break loose, because he wants his life still together, but of course it comes at a cost. The spell of course fractures and the multiverse starts bleeding through, where everyone who knew him in the past comes into this universe. And looking at this now, this opening stretch is doing a lot of the quiet work. It shows us a Peter who's still young enough to believe there's a clean fix, that magic or one perfect solution can undo the damage without real sacrifice. It also shows how deeply his identity as Spider-Man has already rewritten the lives of the people he loves. The first act of No Way Home isn't just set up for the cameos and the fights, it's the moment the film starts asking the question that will define the rest of his story. What does it actually cost to be a Spider-Man when the people closest to you are the ones paying for it? And that question only gets heavier from here on out. Once the spell breaks, the film shifts into something special. The villains start arriving one by one, and suddenly No Way Home is pulled into every version of Spider-Man's history that a lot of us grew up with. You got Doc Ock stepping out of the portal with the same code precision from the Raimi films from his last appearance, Green Goblin brings that unhinged menace, Electro, Sandman, and Lizard all follow pursuit, carrying the weight of their own stories and the specific ways they once clashed with a different version of Peter Parker in their last moments of the previous film. It's not just fan service for the sake of it, the movie uses these characters and their current state to remind you what Spider-Man has always been up against. These are not faceless threats, but people who are broken by power, by loss, and choices that spiraled out of control, and were connected with Peter's life in some form. What makes this part strong is how it forces Tom's Peter to confront the impact of being Spider-Man across more than just his own life. These villains didn't land here by accident, they came here because they know Peter Parker is Spider-Man. In their worlds, that knowledge defined their downfalls, and now a younger Peter is face to face with the consequences of that identity in the most literal way possible. Strange's solution in that part is cold and simple: to send them back. Let them face the endings they were already heading towards in their final films. Clean and efficient with no extra risk to the universe. But sadly, like the original spell he botched, Peter cannot accept that. Even after everything he's already gone wrong, even with the multiverse starting to crack and everyone coming to this one, his first instinct is to still help. He looks at these men, some of them killers, some of them already lost, and sees people who could still be saved. The film spends real time on that choice. Peter just doesn't fight them, he tries to understand what turned them into this, and he starts working on the cures, on second chances, and on the possibility they don't have to go back to die. It's the same kind of spirit that defines Spider-Man from the beginning, which was a refusal to look away from someone who's hurting even while there's someone who has already hurt others. That the regrets of the past Spider-Man are also embedded into this version of Spider-Man. But Strange of course pushes back hard. He sees the bigger picture and the danger of keeping them here. But Peter's stubbornness in this stretch isn't arrogance, it's the heart of who he's becoming. The arrival of the villains doesn't deliver nostalgia, it puts Peter's relationship with power, with responsibility, and the idea of redemption under pressure. And choosing to help them anyway, even though they're villains, shows that this version of Spider-Man, for all his youth and mistakes, still carries the same core belief that every Peter before him did, that helping people, even the ones that the world has written off, is still the point. Of all the villains that come through, of course, too, Green Goblin hits the hardest, and it's not because of nostalgia. From the moment Norman Osborn starts shifting between the man and the monster, the film treats him as something more dangerous than the others. Doc Ock has his tragedy, Electro has his resentment, but the Goblin is pure corruption. He looks at Peter's attempt to cure them, at the stubborn belief that people can be saved, and sees that weakness. He preys on it, and Norman. He mocks the idea of the second chance, where Peter wants to fix what's broken, but the Goblin thrives on power that comes from breaking things further. That the character of the Goblin is the polar opposite to the character of Spider-Man. Of course, remembering his line from the original film, that you and I are not so different, and he's true on that. They're just two sides of the same coin of power, but how you choose responsibility over that. And that's why many people today still say that this version of the Goblin is Peter Parker's greatest enemy. Even in Tom's case, because of how personal it gets fast. Norman spends a lot of time around May and the others, where he gets to hear the talk about helping, about responsibility, about not becoming the worst version of yourself, where when the goblin finally takes full control, he turns all of that against Peter and his own ideology. The fight at the apartment isn't just another action scene, it's the goblin dismantling the last of Peter's innocence in real time, showcasing the truth of what it takes, rejecting the cure and choosing power over responsibility, and then of course cutting deep by killing Aunt May. And May's death is the moment the film stops being about a kid trying to fix a mistake and becoming something heavier. She's the last piece of the life Peter still had, the one person who grounded him, who kept reminding him about who he was supposed to be. And when she dies in his arms, repeating the words that have defined Spider-Man for generations, something finally in this version of Peter breaks. The rage that follows isn't the same as frustration that he shows earlier in the film, it's colder, harder, and for the first time, this Peter looks like someone who's lost more than he can carry. The goblin just didn't take his aunt, he forced them to confront the full cost of the path he's on, that helping people, that trying to save even the ones who don't want to be saved, can leave you with nothing, and how Peter in that moment would be turning had he not stopped. And looking at it now, this is the stretch that truly hardened Tom's Spider-Man. Everything before this point was still a young hero still growing into the weight of the mantle. After May, this version of himself is gone. He's a broken shell of himself, sad, and the rest of the film is about what he does with the pieces to pick it all up. And so, of course at that point is when you finally bring the two characters everyone was expecting from that point on. When Tobey and Andrew Spider-Man finally step into the story, it's easy to frame them as pure nostalgia or another multiversal swing, but that understates what this film is actually doing with them after the part of the goblin breaking the Spider-Man we know right now. These aren't just cameos for the crowd, they're older versions of that same mantle, carrying years of experience, failure, and the loss that Tom's Peter has not fully lived with yet. And in the wake of May's death, when this younger Peter is at its most broken and is most dangerous, their presence becomes the thing that keeps him from losing himself completely. Of course, by this point, Tom has hardened into rage. He wants the goblin dead and wants to end the cycle, where the only way that feels fair in that moment is by taking the life of the man who took May's. Where it's true that that version of himself is understandable, but it's also the version that could destroy everything that Spider-Man is supposed to stand for and turn him into yet another Green Goblin that the previous two have already faced in their lives with their best friends and of course Norman. So Tobey and Andrew just don't show up to fight the battles for them, they show up to recognize the place he's in, because they've been there too. Andrew especially understands the specific pain of losing someone you couldn't save and the temptation to let that pain turn into something colder, and Tobey carries the quieter weight of having lived with the consequences of his choice for much longer. Together they don't lecture, they guide. What they offer is the perspective that only comes with time. They help the younger Peter see that loss doesn't have to break you into someone who stops caring, it can refine you. It can help make the choice to keep helping people, even the ones who hurt you, mean more and not less. When Tom is ready to kill Norman, it's Tobey who steps in and stops him, not because the goblin deserves any mercy in that moment, but because the act of killing him would change Peter in a way he couldn't take back. This film makes that clear choice. The wiser Spider-Man still believes in the possibility of saving someone, even when it would be easier to not to. They push Tom onto holding that part of himself that has always tried to help, the part that made him reach for the cures instead of just the victories. And in doing so, they help him become his own version of Spider-Man, not a copy of either of them, and not the same kid who walked into this film hoping for a clean fix, but something steadier and someone who understands the cost now, who has felt the meaning to lose everything that grounded him, and who still chooses the selfless path anyway. That guidance is the real weight of their appearance. The nostalgia is the surface of this film, but underneath, it's the one of the Spider-Man who helped the next survive into the thing that almost destroyed him, and teaching him that never stopping caring is the only way that Mantle still stays worth carrying. So by the time the final fight arrives with the three, the film stops treating the villains as pure obstacles and starts treating them as reflections. The three Spider-Men aren't just teaming up to win a battle, they're standing in the middle of a shared history of pain, one that consists of their own and with the people they fought, and choosing what to do with that. Each of those villains arrived carrying something broken, and Norman, more than any of them, held hostage by the greediest, most corrosive version of himself, is the one that needs saving the most. The Goblin just isn't a persona, it's the part of him that chooses power over everything else and refuses to let go. What makes this stretch land is that the film never pretends that these men were born evil. It shows the fight they each had with the worst parts of themselves, and it puts the three Peters in the position of deciding whether that fight is still worth joining. They could have sent them back into the endings they were already racing towards, but instead, they worked to cure each of them still to get to a better future. That's a choice that only makes sense because the Spider-Man understand the weight of what these men carry. They felt their decisions on the same isolation, the same failure, and the same temptation to stop caring. That's why Norman becomes the clearest test of this idea. Even after everything, after May, after the rage, after the almost killing blow, the film still frames him as someone trapped inside the goblin's hunger rather than someone who is the goblin completely. When the cure finally takes, what is left is the man who can only see what he's done. That moment doesn't erase the damage, it just refuses to say that the damage is the only thing he was ever going to be. The same thing like Max and Electro, who wanted to be a better version of himself. That's why the three Spider-Man and these villains matter together in the end. The final fight isn't about proving who is stronger, it's about three versions of the same hero looking at the pain they created through their enemies and deciding that the better version of themselves is the one that still tries to save people from it, even involving the ones that hurt them the most and the ones who took the most from this version of Peter. The movie holds on to that line all the way through, and it makes the whole confrontation feel more than just a climax and feel more like the point. The best part of No Way Home also is the ending. Not the fights, not the cameos, not even the catharsis of curing the villains. It's the quiet, devastating choice that Peter makes when the only way to fix everything is to erase himself. After May's death, after the rage, after learning the other two older Spider-Man and what loss can do for you if you let it, Peter finally understands the full weight of the mistake that started it all. What started this was him asking Strange to bend the spell so that people who loved him could still remember him. That small human selfishness cracked the multiverse open, and the only real way to fix it is to go further than he's ever wanted. Spider-Man can stay in that point. The hero the city knows can keep existing, even his friends can know, but the boy underneath, the one who had friends with a support system with a life, has to disappear from everyone, even Strange. MJ and Ned will have to live on without him. No one will be able to ever know who he is. He will be alone in a way he's never felt from before, and he chooses to do it anyway. Not because it's easy, and not because he's given up. He chooses to do it because he's finally learned the lesson the entire film has been building towards, that the risk is worth it if everyone else is okay. The people he loves get to live free of the danger that comes with knowing him, and the world keeps its Spider-Man without the collateral damage of his identity. And he accepts that cost of that everything personal he still had left, even after May. This is the selfless core of the character fully realized. The younger mistakes, the desperate fixes, the hardening after May, and the guiding from Toby and Andrew leads to Peter being here. He doesn't just survive the events of the film, he lets them strip down to the one thing that matters. Being Spider-Man, meaning putting people first, even when it costs you your life that you wanted. And this ending doesn't feel like a defeat or a win. It feels like the moment that this version of Peter finally becomes the hero he was always meant to grow into, alone, unknown, and still swinging to help people anyway. And that is the price, and that's why it remains to be the strongest part of the entire film. So looking back on No Way Home now, it feels less like a crossover event and more like the necessary destiny of the Spider-Man. Everything that Peter went through, the public unmasking, the failed spell, the villain, May's death, and the guidance from the other versions of himself, and the final sacrifice was always leading to one clear thing: learning what it actually takes to carry the mantle forward. Pain was always going to come, and death was always going to come. The film never pretends otherwise, but what it cares about the most is how you let those things shape you. Do they turn you bitter and closed off, or do they let you strip away the last of your illusions and leave you with a clearer thought of why you keep going? By the end, Peter understands the difference. He has lost lots of people who made his life feel like a home. He has lost the version of himself that still believed there might be a way to have both the hero and the normal life. Instead of letting that destroy him, it lets it refine him. The selflessness he chooses in the final spell isn't sudden, it's the result of every hard lesson the film puts him through. He learns that being Spider-Man means accepting that the people you love can become the price, and the only way to honor them is to keep protecting a world that no longer knows your name. And that's why the title means more than the multiverse plot. No Way Home isn't about just sending the villains and the other Spider-Man back to their own realities, it's about Peter finally knowing what home actually is, and what is the cost to protect it. Home was never just the apartment or the friends in the city that once cheered him on. Home itself was responsibility, the choice to keep showing up even after everything that made the choice feel possible after taken away. In that sense, the film closes on the one chapter of his story with complete clarity, that this Peter now understands the weight, the loneliness, and the purpose, and understanding that is what lets him carry it forward. Stories about Spider-Man has always circled the same truth, that ordinary people can choose extraordinary responsibility even when it leaves them alone. This film simply lets that truth land with the full weight, and because it does, that version of Peter who walks away at the end is ready for whatever comes next, for a brand new day. And that's why it still matters and why it will keep mattering long after the excitement of the moment has passed. I'm all done. Goodbye.